G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I talk a lot about active versus passive buyers. And when I say passive buyers, these are people that pre-approved, that like to think that they're shopping for a property, but if the right opportunity came up tomorrow, they'd probably find a reason to not pull the trigger. And that's why I've brought in Jay. G'day Jay, how you doing?
G'day mate, I'm good, how are you?
Jay Pace from Providence, mate. Pleasure to have you here. We've obviously known each other for some time.
We have.
Yeah, our industries are far too small, so we cross paths.
Yes.
And I want to say thanks very much for coming on here. Really appreciate the time that we share together. And,
thank you.
Mate, so if someone's listening now going, why am I going to listen to Jay and what should I get out of this episode? What do you reckon they'd get out of this by the end of it?
I think one of the important things is that understanding what the actual market's doing, not from a year-to-year basis, which is always really important, but a week-to-week basis is even more important because time flies so quickly. So I've got some great breakdowns in regards to, you know, the time in the market, how much it's costing you, just the time of getting your pre-approval, all that type of stuff. So really just if hopefully they can get anything out of this today, it's just if you're going to buy a property, you're thinking about doing it, there's all the reasons in the world to pull your finger out and do it now rather than wait. There's no perfect time.
Yeah. We're going to come back to that week by week because I always credit you, but I always pull this data out. When I tell people waiting, I'm like, you know how much it's costing you to wait week on week? I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But let's go what I just said earlier, which is rationally it makes sense for people to invest. Emotionally, something else happens. What do you think is going on? Where's this disconnect for a lot of potential investors or people that have been able to push through and actually be able to build a larger portfolio?
Yeah.
What do you think is holding people back?
I honestly think one of the biggest things that holds people back is loved ones with good intentions. I really think that's a big thing. I remember when we bought one of our, we upgraded our home in 2020 during COVID.
Yeah.
I'm in the industry, I've been doing it for a long time. Every dinner that we had, my in-laws or my parents, while me and my wife were there, were like, what are you doing going to open homes right now? Didn't you read the news? Didn't you see the markets crashing? Didn't you see that Westpac said the market was dropped by 40%? Like, they weren't trying to talk me out of it because they didn't want me to buy a property. They really had good intentions, but they were scared. And people really do get affected by that peer pressure. And I think that's one of the big things too. There's peer pressure to not buy, there's peer pressure to buy. So there's these outside influences that I think really do affect people quite significantly. And you've got to realize where that's coming from. And it's hard to not listen to your parents and stuff that have looked after you your entire life.
Absolutely.
When they're telling you shouldn't do this right now, or your best friend and stuff saying don't do it, or listening to horror stories. So I think that's one of the big things that I see is people who have good intentions that are telling you that. I also think one of the biggest blocks that people get is just not knowing what's happening in the market. We live in a day and age now where I think it's actually harder to make a decision because there's so much information and data. And if you have an angle and you can spin some of the numbers that I see, that I'm like, that's the correct number, but the way they've spun that gives a totally different outcome as to the decision I would make. And you can get paralysis analysis. I speak to people all the time that have been looking for months or maybe years. They know all the podcasts, they've seen your stuff, they've read the books. They still haven't made a decision.
Correct. They tell me podcasts that I didn't know existed.
Yeah. Yeah, and they still haven't made a decision. And I think the biggest issue, and I'll finish on this, is that they don't actually have a plan. They want to buy property, but there's no plan on how to actually get there.
They mistake that for the plan.
That's
I'm
right.
going to buy a property and it's like, okay, what are we looking to get out of this? And that question just, you can hear the silence and they're not prepared for it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about big sums here. I mean, there's no way you and I would go and buy a $600,000 car without researching the hell out of that thing.
I'd know everything about it.
I'd know everything about it too. And I think you spend far less on a car, you know more.
Oh, yeah, you'd hope so.
You've watched the videos, and again, we'll talk about it, but at some point you go to a dealership or you go to a showroom and you're like, I think I'm ready to now move forward. So there is, again, I'll say this time and time again, the property market rewards action takers, decision makers, and by sitting on the sidelines, clearly financially, you're hurting yourself by waiting.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Before we kick off, it's something I call the 3 Ps. So for people that a newer guest on here, a bit about yourself personally, professionally, and property journey. You mentioned you've just bought there as well, and when I read about yourself, you've had your background in trading.
Yeah, stockbroking.
Stockbroking. So to make the move from stockbroking to property, people are going, oh, is this a love affair with property, or have you got a mix of assets? So yeah, only what you're kind of confident to share publicly is what I'd say.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I always think it's funny when people talk about their own personal property and assets, because it's really just a number and you don't know how much debt they possibly have. Like some people are like, oh, 10 properties in 3 years and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, well, are they good properties? Are they worth more than when you purchase them? Are you just in debt? So I think it's always funny when people kind of just tell you about their property.
The top line number.
Yeah, because until you actually dig deeper, you don't know, right? But for me, so I was in stockbroking for about 10 years and I really liked it. It was very much the way that you thought it would be in the movies when you're younger. Like everyone I worked with was driving like a Maserati, a Porsche, and I had a Mitsubishi Magna. And it was that environment. It was very different. It was very full on.
But it had chrome hubcaps, right?
Yeah. Well, it was polished. They were polished, but they were really nice. And yeah, it was one of those things where I got into the world of derivatives, which is basically they derive off stock prices. And I got really sick of people taking money out of the portfolios that we're putting together and putting them into property. And that's how I created a hatred towards property, actually, because it was stealing my clients' money all the time. And I liked stocks, and I fell in love with Forex trading and derivative trading. And then after a little while, I thought, I'm going to beat these guys at their own game. So we created an exchange traded fund. It was a basket of CFDs, contracts for difference. And what we did is we chose companies that would benefit from property price booms. So like Goodman Group, Dulux Paint, Stockland, etc. We put them in a basket. And the client could purchase a share ownership of that basket, and it would kind of follow the markets. But in order to get that information, I needed to interview a lot of buyers agents and property experts. So I kind of posed as an investor, and I did this quite a lot. And Providence, the company I now work for and have an ownership in, is one of the companies that I met with. And they spoke my language because they were more about the numbers. It wasn't a sell or a spruik or anything like that. So at the time I had stocks and I had no property. And then a couple of years later, I kind of converted everything to property. But I really still think that having a diversification of asset class is really important. I think that I used to hate waking up in the morning and seeing what the Dow Jones did and going, oh, today's going to suck on the market, like knowing my work was going to be full on. But at the same time, I was always happy when I saw something bad happen and I knew, well, my property price is not going to change today. I don't have to look at a little ticker that's telling me it's up or down. So yeah, I had that kind of combination of both. And still to this day, I think, stocks, derivatives, funds, crypto, property, I think you should look at diversifying in kind of all of it.
There's a lot to be said about specialization or going all in on a particular asset class. And when you know property and you stay in your lane, there's some people that really subscribe to that. I do think it is healthy to have a mixture. Some of the shares you don't really see, it sits there and it should sit there, and you just over time you just see it just increases in value, and do not touch it. Keep that there for retirement. That's exciting. And then family wise,
so I got 2 little girls, me and my wife, and they keep me on my toes, and it's great. Being a dad, I reckon out of all the stuff that I've done, running companies, trading on the ASX, bidding for clients for tens of millions of dollars of properties, nothing's more stressful than raising 2 little girls.
Absolutely. I hear, mate. 2 girls.
I know you know. It's very rewarding and it's full on. And the one thing I will say on a serious note is once you have kids, my investing approach actually changed. Which I think a lot of people don't talk a lot about. Like as an investor, once I had children, my risk tolerance levels changed. My diversification appetite changed. Everything changed because I was thinking, what's going to end up being mine? What am I buying for them? And are we putting it in trust when the girls get a bit older? It forces you to think way more ahead than when you're an individual investor or even just with your partner. That changed me, and that was the biggest thing I think that really affected me on.
And so what did that change for you action-wise?
So definitely straight away I was like, time is something I don't have enough of. I realized that I've got to think about the future, but I've got to think about how I can move that faster. So starting to invest interstate for myself was something that I was like, majority of my property is going to be in New South Wales, in Sydney. So one day my kids can live in it, etc. But once I started doing the numbers on holding costs, performance, rental yields, etc., I was like, this isn't giving me what I actually need to get to where I need to be. And that actually supercharged me into going, you actually have to take more risks now while you're a little bit younger so that you can reap those benefits later. And then even just learning more about entity structures, trusts, etc. Those are things that I didn't think about when I originally started buying properties. And now it's really does take a big part in that decision-making process.
Absolutely, mate. You're right. It changes everything about even setting an example financially, going, hey, man, I'm going to tell my kids to invest, but if I'm not doing it for myself and doing it successfully and diligently, then how are they going to take advice from someone else? Money, family and money is a big thing, right? Like we think about intergenerational wealth. We speak about that a lot here. Making good decisions to build property and wealth for the next generation to come. Do you save for them? Do you have a strategy for them?
Really good question. And again, just on what you just mentioned, talking about money has been something that I think only maybe within your and my generation has become something that's a little bit more normal. Whereas back then, especially coming from like immigrant parents and stuff like that. Yeah, so I'm Greek and Maltese. So my mum was born there, but she came when she was young. My dad was born here. So I'm very Aussie, as you can tell. But it was something that you didn't really talk about.
Absolutely
like it was private.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And even what my parents were doing with money, it was never discussed with us as we were younger.
You would never have known how much your parents' mortgage was, right?
No clue. No clue. When it was paid off, nothing like that. Our lives didn't change in that respect. So it's quite interesting how that changes over time. But yeah, with my girls, like I find, just the TV shows that they watch and things like that, the reality that they're shown is so different to what I had when I was a kid. And just trying just basic stuff, and I can't help myself. Like my daughter will say, Dad, can I borrow some money for school? Like my youngest who's in kindy, and I'm like, if you buy something, I want you to know how much it cost you so that when you come home, you can tell Daddy and we can discuss what that cost was, how much change you should have got back and why. Because my kid just goes to the canteen, puts her money down, and she's just like, well, it's just I'm giving something to get something, but she doesn't understand that it's value or worth or anything like that. She walks around with a $500 iPad in kindergarten and gets home and throws it on the ground. And I'm like, oh my Lord, it's like you have no clue about the value of anything. And that's the reality you try to give to them. But we live in such a consumer culture now where I'm sure your kids too, with your in-laws and your parents, they end up getting like 50 presents for Christmas.
Dude, don't even.
And they don't understand value, what things are worth or anything like that. So I think it's something that financial literacy, which isn't taught in school, it's really the parents' responsibility.
You're right. People look at school going, they've got no concept.
No concept.
At school. So I'm like, why are we teaching them financial literacy at school? We can talk about some concepts and that's great. So I can hammer home, but they're going to learn. They're going to learn money behaviors. And I guess it'll come out in, we don't have money for that. It'll come out in, that's too expensive or that person's rich. So it almost comes out in that behavior, like how we learn and what we see around that relationship parents have with money. And you'll see it. I mean, most relationships will break down because of financial difficulties. So if money becomes the bane, like the reason a marriage or a relationship breaks down, naturally kids are going to go, money is the root of all evil.
That's right.
And we can grow up with that. Unintentionally, parents may not be saying it, but they're acting out in a different way.
Yeah. And onto that too, the thing that our kids have that you and I didn't have is now they've got the perception of wealth is totally different. Because you got influencers and all these people that do these things and they're driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis and they got these houses which are all on lease or rented. It's all fake. But the perception now with social media, I'm on a holiday, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But they've got no idea how much money has that person got saved. And I always tell my kids now, even though my oldest is only 8 years old, I'm like, you're going to know who's rich once you turn 50 and 60. Like that's when you're going to realize which friends of yours actually have money, because the other ones that were just trying to keep up with the Joneses, buy the new car, have this, have that, you'll realize that they squandered everything away to impress people that they don't care about by buying things that they don't need.
Mate, that's a very harsh reality, isn't it, for that age? I mean, I tell everyone I'm in my 40s, and I think that's what we're saying. Like, we don't have time.
No.
Right? I feel like a lot of clients that I'm talking to in their 40s going, I've got to this point, I've got good incomes. Now I need to make hay while the sun is shining because I don't have time. And they'll be the beneficiaries that in 10, 20 years time, which is that 50 to 60 age bracket, because they put down good roots. And you look at the people that invested in their 20s and 30s, like they're already ahead of the curve as well. So yeah, make time your friend rather than getting to 50 and 60 going, mate, I've still got to keep working in this job even though I hate it, because of this big damn mortgage that I'm in that I can't get out of. Yes. But the car lease is equivalent to the home loan repayment sometimes as well. It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, mate. Yeah, look, I feel for us, from the day the girls were born, $100 a week each goes into their bank account.
Yeah,
and then we did the math over, when they get to 18, and that money can only be used to buy a property.
Yeah, it's
the
really
only
smart.
thing that, it's the only case, I guess it's the only way we can contribute at that point, and then we build properties that eventually, it's going to be the bank of mum and dad.
We can't. How else are they going to do it?
Absolutely not. It scares me when I think there's young Australians that can't get into the market. What's it going to be like for our girls? You know? If we're not thinking now about setting ourselves up to then help them, there's no point helping the kids if we're not helping ourselves, because we're just going to be a burden to them.
Yeah.
So we've got to help ourselves, which means we put down roots, build a portfolio, which is then they can become the beneficiaries of that as well, right?
Yeah. Good on you for doing that. They're going to thank you later.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And it's a non-negotiable. It comes out every week, and I'm open about it because we've got to lead with example. We're in these roles, and we think people looking to us for guidance and strategy. And whatever it is, it doesn't have to be $100. It's $20, $50.
Anything.
It's something.
Yeah.
It's something that compounds over time. Hey mate, I want to get into this one, which is the cost of waiting. Now, I love this because when we had a chat, I think late last year or something, and you put up the data from the last quarter, but now it's been updated. So when I looked back at 2023, which in Sydney was the cost of waiting, the growth that we had in that property market was, I think, the median property price, you had to be saving nearly $2,000 a week to keep pace.
That's right. Yeah. And now the last quarter's done.
Yes.
So I redid the numbers. So $2,400 per week is the amount of increase of capital growth that we saw every week from January 1st, 2023 to January 1st, 2024.
Wow.
And according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the average Australian household saves $192 per week. So when I get clients who, like I said to you outside before, we've had 13 interest rate rises since May 2022. When I get clients who would say to me, we're just going to wait and see what happens with interest rates. We're just going to see what the RBA says. We're just going to see what happens with the markets. I'm like, how much money are you making to have that confidence that you're going to wait and see? Like, am I missing something? Because it did not make sense. And, so Sydney was $2,400. Brisbane was $2,000. Perth was $1,900. Adelaide was $1,700. Melbourne was $500 per week. So that's the top capital cities with the largest population, starting from Melbourne all the way down to Adelaide. But you look at that and you just think there was no major capital city where you would have most likely saved more or kept pace with the market based on the speed that it was moving.
It's a damning statistic, and I don't feel like anyone's really captured this until you and I spoke, which is why we've got to share this and get this message out there. And it's harder when people are renting.
Oh yeah,
because you're negative. Call it $600. Median rent would be somewhere around $600.
You're right. Yeah.
So you're already negative $600. Plus, this property is increasing at say $2,000 in Sydney thereabouts. So you're $2,600 in the hole each week.
Yeah.
And again, you're saying, well, you can't physically save that much
There's
money.
no way. There's no way. Which is why the intergenerational wealth thing that you were talking about, for a lot of people, that's their only possible lifesaver that's going to get thrown out to them in this ocean that they're going to be drowning in, is that one day they might get an inheritance that will allow them to purchase something. And the biggest beneficiary during that massive intergenerational wealth transfer, which I think I was reading the numbers a little while ago, and it's like just under $1 trillion that Australia is going to experience in the next 20 years. The majority of that's going to go into property.
Yeah.
Like, where else is it going? The majority of it's going into property.
Yeah.
And so it's just going to push prices more. And those renters that you're talking about, the media's been telling them for the past 3 years now that the market's going to crash.
Yeah.
They're scared. So those people that would typically graduate from being renters to being owner-occupiers have stayed there, swollen out the rental pool. And now the Albanese government's bringing 750,000 migrants to the country by the end of this financial year, and over 85% are already here. They're going to rent as well.
Correct.
So what's going to happen? Rents are going to keep going up. You're not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah. And renting, I say renting's a time in your life where you rent, while you're trying to get on your feet, or a period in life before you put down roots. So, I mean, I've rented and bounced around a little bit, and it was all well and good. I think, that turning point really comes when you think about, settling down to have a family. And, mate, once you get to that point I spoke on another podcast recently, which is most people think, oh, we'll buy when we have kids. But by that stage, you may have gone down to one income.
Yeah.
You've now got a dependent, which in the bank size costs you somewhere circa $50,000, $60,000 as a decrease in your borrowing capacity.
Yep.
You've then got extra living expenses. You've been renting and you haven't got savings to show for it, and the property market is only increased in value. Yeah. It's such a perfect storm that when people go to buy, or at that point, the only thing they can do is rent best. They're having to compromise on what their plans are because they've taken that wait and see approach, and it just hasn't worked. And I'm like, guys, double income, no kids is your sweet spot, and you think it's scary then to take off a big mortgage or buy these investment properties. I'm like, you will thank yourself in about 3 to 5 years when you've made those decisions.
Yeah.
And it's scary, but that's when you should be like, when it's just making the undies a bit tight. Yeah. It's probably when you should be making those decisions, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the best thing that my wife and I did was buy our first property that we bought together just after we got engaged, prior to the wedding.
Right.
And it's good because it capped how much we were going to spend on the wedding.
Dude.
Like, do you know what I mean?
100%. I mean, it doesn't matter what race you are. Like, weddings are weddings, and they will cost an absolute arm and a leg. And I look back now, I was like, we spent the equivalent of a house deposit on our wedding day.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at the wedding, when you look at everything, the rings, the honeymoon, all that stuff, I mean, we were close to 100K.
Absolutely.
And we had it in the city, and it was beautiful. And, I got a big European family, so we had over 200 people come.
Yeah.
So and yes, you get a lot of cash. But what I'm saying is that if we hadn't gone forward first and gone, let's buy the house. We know we're in love. We know we're going to get married. This is good. Let's buy the house now. Yeah. The wedding could have blown out more. It could have been a lot harder. And so that's one of the things that I tell a lot of people when I speak to like couples that are engaged that tell me they want to buy a property. I'm like, you're doing the best thing you can do is buy now before you go through and actually get married.
Don't we get a kick out of like the young people coming through? I'm like, I see I get a 20-something-year-old coming to the office. I'm like, you are making the best damn decision of your life. And and take nothing away. You could go on a holidays, and we've traveled, and university of life is traveling, and that's cool.
Yeah.
But also buying property is going to set you up that you can travel even better in time as well.
Totally.
Yeah. So when we talk about the cost of fear, then, so this is obviously very rational. Buy a property, it increases in value. But what is the fear element that comes into it? So when you're talking, because you're obviously at the coalface talking to people that are trying to buy, what are some of those objections? What's some of those fear scenarios that are coming up for them?
Yeah. It's really interesting because so I'm a buyer's agent. So the company's been around since 2006. So we've had a lot of experience in the market. The market's very cyclical, so it moves in different states. So you deal with people and their perception of the state that's actually currently now the right place to buy into. So it's an extra layer as well. Is that I don't know that state. I've never bought anything there for. And then you've also adding on top of that, you're going to pay a buyer's agency fee. So it's the fear of, well, I don't know where I'm buying. It's the fear of, are these guys worth the money that I'm actually going to pay them? So there's so many layers of fear or doubt that you're adding on top of what's already a really difficult thing, especially for first home buyers. But a good professional, if they're doing the right thing and based on the percentage increases that we see, like we charge between 1.5 to 2%, right, of the purchase price of success. And I think that's kind of standard across most buyer's agents, all right? But last year, I mean, Perth did over 18% capital growth in 1 year. So my clients that we purchased for in WA, as an example, that fear that they had of paying, after they've started to see that movement, they're like, I didn't get ripped off, it's okay.
Yes.
Right? So I think, like I said, you've got the layers of, I don't know where I'm buying. I don't know if this is the right decision. My parents told me not to pay a buyer's agent. It's too much money, et cetera. There's all these layers. But in regards to the cost of that fear, I think that you and I have lived through a time where we probably had the largest, and I'm going to use the word propaganda spew from the media regarding, the end of days for us. I mean, 2020, when COVID got announced in March, we were doing a presentation for ANZ Bank in Martin Place 2 weeks before it happened. There was not a bottle of hand sanitizer in sight. No one wore masks. Everyone was together. There were about 200 first home buyers crammed into the Martin Place bank there. And we were talking about it. And I remember the ANZ economists going, oh, yeah, there's this thing happening in Wuhan, China, but we think it's going to be nothing. And it was really funny, and they just dismissed it. And then 2 weeks later, we went into basically a lockdown. And I remember ANZ Bank came out and they said struggling borrowers are going to have to consider selling their properties. This is in March 2020, right? Then Westpac came out, St. George, CBA, all these banks came out. Harry Dent, which you and I talked about the other day, Robert Kiyosaki, all these guys came out. It's definitely happening. Where the apocalypse is here, right? And all these harbingers of doom basically came out. And the interesting thing, and I'll send you the image so that you can show your subscribers, but I actually have the numbers from the onset of COVID, which was March 2020, to February 2024. And I'm really excited about next month because it's going to be March to March, right? But Sydney did 24.8% during that time, which was the equivalent of $224,000 increase. Now, remember, these are averages. So if you purchase an above average performing suburb, you would have been on easy street. Melbourne was the worst performer. It did 11%, which was still about 77K, but it's the worst performer. And I think this is where political policy and things like that come into account. And I don't want to get political about it, but I'm just saying.
We're still seeing that in the Melbourne market at the moment.
Absolutely.
We're seeing the knock-on effect.
I would say the knock-on effect being that exodus of a lot of people leaving and the government now scrambling because they're already in deficit to get more money, and these new land tax laws they're bringing in, it's making it even less attractive. And the rental yields in Melbourne are only 3.5%, and that's gross. And what's an average interest rate? What, 6.5, something like that? So you got 6.5 net on a 3.5% gross income. It's not very attractive to people. So they were the worst performer, but the top performers were Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth. And we're talking minimum 50% increase in property prices. So from about $250,000 to nearly $300,000 increase in 3 years. So if you were those people that were listening to the news, watching what's going on, and you're still renting, and I'm so sorry, again, this is not a dig. I understand why you listened, because why would the government and that try to freak you out? Why would the propaganda be there? Like, why? These people probably genuinely thought, these economists, that they were right. We were faced with something we'd never seen in our lifetime. We were told that millions of people were going to die. We weren't going to have a vaccine for 9 years, apparently. That was the first reports that we got. Unemployment was going to go over 6%, like heaps of issues. I understand why people were scared. But what I'm saying is, when you push through all the bull crap and you started actually reading the numbers and you looked at, we printed 3 times more money during COVID than we did during the GFC. And then everyone was all surprised when inflation went up. And so once you started to look at the numbers, and we got a bit of flack, we did a video in May 2020 saying this is going to be the best time for anyone to buy property. And we got a lot of people saying, well, you're just saying that because you're a buyer's agent. You want people to buy property. And we're like, we went through all the data, all the numbers. And
how do you get to that conclusion then? Because that's such contrary thinking at the time. Almost would sound, I'm going to say, tone deaf to people.
I think a lot of it for me was that I'd seen the GFC and I saw the same thing. And during the GFC, I remember sitting there in my office watching Lehman Brothers and all that pop up, and everyone walking outside with cardboard boxes.
That was a universal sign. Even in Sydney, that was me.
Freaking out, right? And I was like, holy moly. And I didn't understand it. And I remember asking, because I was a bit younger back then, 2008, and I remember asking one of the senior buyers agents, stockbrokers. I asked him, I said, I can't understand this. Subprime mortgages. In Australia, we've got non-recourse loans, so they're very different to, being able to just throw the keys at the bank and say, take my property, and the debt doesn't follow you. We don't have that here. and the bank getting $100 in the US and being able to lend that same $100 out 11 times. Whereas in Australia, the bank's only allowed to do it 3 times. Yeah. So I couldn't understand it. And then the broker that I was working with said, mate, think of it as a financial crime instead of thinking about it in regards to the politics and everything like that. He goes, who's going to get rich? Who's going to get poor? And as soon as I started looking at the property market during that time, during COVID, I was like, who's going to get rich here? Who's going to get poor? And we started to break down the numbers, and it's like, what contractors are getting X contract here to clean buildings now? What contractors are getting, what's going to happen to commercial property and people that have commercial property? What's happening with work home, and how's that going to affect the market? So we started breaking it down, and we were just like, we were very confident. And if anyone wants to watch the video, it's still up there from May. And we broke down all the numbers in regards to migration and what was happening. And we were like, this market's going to be fine. Wow. Because the savings alone, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Australians had never saved as much money until COVID came along.
Absolutely.
Because we weren't going to Bali. We weren't buying Mercedes-Benz. Everyone was freaking out. So we stockpiled cash for the first time ever. We were stockpiling it. And I was like, what's going to happen once we get given the okay? Where's this cash going to go? And it went straight back into the property market. And we saw the highest increase in prices that we've seen in over 2 decades.
What a phenomenon. What a time, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a time. And you overlay that with like lowest interest rates record. And
that's what I mean. And now people are complaining about interest rates. And you look at the numbers and you go, mate, I know some people that are still on 1.8% that are locked in.
Yeah, and the prospect just of coming off it is enough to freak them out. Like, wait till you actually come off it. I had a touch with someone else the other day. They're like, I'm worried my fixed rate comes off next February. I was like, this whole thing will be a blip, mate, to you. This will just be noise. Front. Correct. I was like, mate, you should be bloody celebrating.
Yeah, send me a bottle of wine.
Totally.
Because I got you that great rate. I locked you in.
Yeah. There's nothing to worry about there. But,
no.
Good, mate. So let's go around. So obviously, boots on the ground, you're kind of seeing what's happening state by state, which I think is super, super important, which I want to kind of go through. So let's start with Perth, because like you said, Perth last year did, I think, somewhere like 18,
over 18%,
20%. Yeah.
Plus rental yields about 23% total return on your money.
Yep. And it seems to be so polarizing because you speak to clients and they're like, there's nothing more polarizing than, say, buying in Perth.
Yeah.
First of all, why is that the case? And secondly, what is actually going on there?
Yeah, it's really good. And there's so many infrastructure spending projects and so many natural resource materials that are being pulled out there that it's kind of hard. So I tried to make a list of like my top things that I like about it.
Because everyone's an expert on Perth's economy and its exposure to mining.
It's so hard.
It's like everyone's an expert on inflation at the moment.
Everyone's an expert. That's right. Before it was vaccines and now it's inflation, right? Everyone just knows. Yeah. It's really interesting. The thing with Perth, and I was only there 2 weeks ago. Again, so the only way, in my opinion, you can buy correctly in those places if you have locals doing the buyer's agency work for you.
Yeah, right.
I've got to admit, we've been around for 18 years now. We tried it many years ago remotely. I'll call the agent up from Sydney. I'll have a chat. Even with Brisbane, we'll call them up from here because we had all of our guys here originally.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work properly, right? The agents don't want to deal with you as much because straight away they're like, you don't understand the laws here. You don't understand the contracts here. You're not from here. You think everything's overpriced or whatever. You're a pain. Don't want to deal with you. So until we decided back in, I think it was just after the Royal Commission in 2017, we're like, we need people in every state.
Yeah, nice.
Like we need a minimum of 2 people in every state. So after we got that, another phenomenon that we found that you can't get from data, and we're very data centric, is the feeling or the personal bias that people get from living locally. Just like now, if we got a room full of 10 people and we said, what do you think about Redfern in Sydney, where you and I are? You'll get a split between people that remember what Redfern used to be like or have experienced Redfern recently and know what it currently is like now.
Yes.
And that personal bias is actually something that's really important when purchasing a property, really important. And it's something that you can't do if you just jump on the phone and do it. And this is why, again, I think buyer's agents as a profession has to become more and more popular for people to utilize, because jumping on Google Maps and stuff like that, or just reading a report, you won't get the feel of it. You really won't.
Not. Yeah.
And if you get an extra 1 or 2%, you were talking about compounding when you're talking about saving for your girls. once you realize getting that 1 or 2% extra in the beginning in a suburb, compounded over holding a property for 10, 15, 20 years, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars difference in growth. Absolutely. So for us, it's big. So with Perth, focusing on that, absolutely. So 4th largest capital city in Australia in regards to population. Some of the stats that are making it attractive now are that it has the highest median household income in Australia, so they're richer. Okay, they make more money in Perth than any other state.
Which blows people away. It even blows me away when I think about it because, mate, in Sydney, we earn the most money.
Well, yeah, you think we earn the most money because we have the most debt. Yeah. You got people in $3 million houses. And in Perth, you got someone in an $800K house making more than the person in the $3 million house, right? It's highest median household income in Australia. Lowest vacancy rate in Australia. And this goes back to when Perth had, and you'll probably remember this, Perth had in 2014, the European oil crisis, when Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain came out basically from the European Union and said, we might not be able to meet our obligations to the EU. And this is when the UK ironically went in and said, no one's leaving the EU. We're all going to be a family. We're staying here forever. And then ironically, they left. Yeah. And so what happened is China and India freaked out because they thought, the EU is our largest customer. We send our electronics, our cars, everything there. They go into a recession, we're going into a recession. So they called up Rio Tinto, BHP, Fortescue Metals, and they were like, slow down. We might not need as much. So what we saw from 2014, kind of July onwards, and this is such a fast affected market, we saw unemployment go up. We saw demand for housing drop. Like we saw that chain reaction from around 2014, if you look at the chart on the housing prices, about 8 years of negative growth.
And that's what it is. Like I've had brokers in Perth that I speak to that haven't been able to refinance clients for years.
Nothing.
The LVRs haven't moved.
Done nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So you had that drop down, and then the perception that the media is it's a boom or bust, never works, you know, it's a mining town. And then, as I said, you go there and you go, wow, everyone here's got a bit of money, you know, highest income, lowest vacancy rate. You can't get a property there to save you. So difficult to rent, right? Lowest development application rates out of the major capital cities, or one of, I think. But definitely down there at the bottom, because during the time to save the market, the local government put together a first home buyers scheme that was so aggressive that if you just built a brand new property and you'd settled on it, you could buy and build a brand new property next door for cheaper.
Wow.
So it turned everybody off. No one was building. So you've got no new builds there.
Yeah.
They are also the only state government in Australia that currently has a surplus of money in their budget. Everyone else is in deficit.
Wow.
So you start to look at all of these things and you go, okay, what's in it for the investor? And you go, well, economically it looks attractive. And then secondly as well, you start to go, well, all right, as an investor, what am I getting? And it's like, well, you're getting the second cheapest properties in Australia in regards to median dwelling value next to Darwin. Yeah. And you're getting the second highest rental yields in Australia next to Darwin. You wouldn't buy in Darwin, in my opinion, because Darwin's peak of the market was May 2014 and it hasn't done anything since then. So we're 10 years behind, the market hasn't done anything. But Perth is in a prime position based on the current cycle stage to probably have a, you know, 5 years of significant capital growth. And then it'll peter off and it'll go sideways again. And then I think Melbourne will probably be the next one to take off because it's been suppressed for as long as it has.
And this is where everyone's looking at Melbourne going, Melbourne's going to be cold for quite some time.
Yeah.
Again, we're not giving advice.
No.
This is general in nature.
Yeah.
But then when I heard Bernard Salt speak recently, he's saying, but the population growth in Melbourne within the next 10 years is going to become exponential. Is going to pass Sydney.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting here scratching your head going, hang on, Melbourne's going to boom from a population perspective, but short term, it's going to have very slow price growth.
Yeah.
But at some point, that's going to turn as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why understanding property cycles is so important. And this is why I get frustrated when people say that capital city never makes money, that capital city always makes money. Because when you look at the data long term, like I was telling you before when I was looking at the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, and I'll send this through to you to kind of put up on the screen later. In 2008, when the GFC happened, the median house price in Sydney was $447,000. Okay,
that's wild.
Yeah, I saw you got pictures of they got pictures of DeLoreans outside the time machine. I thought if I had one of those, be the richest person on the planet.
We wouldn't be sitting here.
Oh, mate,
but I mean, here's the thing, right? 2008, I would have been 25, 26.
Yeah.
And there's no way I was able to buy a $450,000 property.
No.
So like when people hear this, like, that's cool. We're not asking you to go back in time and buy that because physically at the time we didn't have the means or the ability to buy.
Yeah.
it's the illustration over time what compounding has done.
That's right.
And to go, don't be that person that in 20 years' time your kids are going, Dad, there was a property in Sydney that was median house price was $1.4 million. Like those are some good days.
Yeah, that's right. But to your point in regards to when I'm saying the GFC, we've just been through COVID and everyone's like the world's going to end. The GFC was a world-ending event as well. And in Sydney, you could have bought a property for $447,000. Yeah. At the same time in Perth, properties were about 15 grand cheaper than Sydney. Yeah, that's how close they were, okay? And the rental yields during 2010 in Sydney was 6.5%. Now they're 3%, okay? So what I'm saying is when you start to look at the data over a longer term period, it becomes much less, I think, overwhelming when you sit there and go, property prices in Sydney are average like house price is $1.4 million. And it's like, yep, okay, that's what it is currently right now. Where do you think it's going to be in 10 years' time? So is today cheap or is today too expensive? Is that a reason not to buy?
Yeah. Yeah, it always helps when you, and it's very hard because we can't see that future. I think there's a word for it, but you can't really actualize the future.
No, it's like, very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. And what else have we got for other states?
Yeah, so we talked about Perth a little bit. In regards to Brisbane, I mean, Brisbane is a really interesting one because I speak to so many people and they're like, I've been waiting for Brisbane to pop for so long, like ages, just waiting for it to pop. I was reading the other day that $1 billion worth of infrastructure is going to be spent in Brisbane in the second half of our decade that we're in right now.
Wow.
So when you start to look at the money that's actually being spent there, Queen's Wharf, the Metro, all those type of things, Southeast Queensland's going to be the first state in Australia that's going to have autonomous public transport.
It's incredible.
Like there's a lot of stuff going for it. I also saw the other day when the Olympics was announced for Brisbane, in America, it was in the top 20 Google searches, Brisbane.
Wow.
No one knows about it.
Yeah.
So when I start to see that...
You mean Brisbane?
Brisbane, that's right, Melbourne. So when you start to see that, you're going, okay, just the sentiment. And personally, I don't think the Olympics itself is actually going to increase prices in Brisbane. But the sentiment or the anecdotal evidence that I've seen of people going, I want Brisbane, and I ask them why, and they say, well, they're going to have the Olympics. It's enough that it's going to move that market, just knowing that there's an event that's happening. Even though the majority of the infrastructure spend for the Olympics happened during 2017 during the Commonwealth Games, that will still move the market. So when I see things like that, I'm going, Brisbane's definitely going to pop. It's more than what it already has. I think it's still quite cheap. Rental yields there are still attractive, around 3.9%, which is still above the average 3.5%. Price points are still low. It makes a lot of sense. There's areas like Sydney that I'd stay away from. You know, I'm not going to badmouth any of them, but some in the west and some in the south that I wouldn't want to go next to. But just like Sydney, there's some suburbs that I wouldn't want to go next to either. So it's really about buying the right type of product in the right location. But the infrastructure spending program in Brisbane is phenomenal, and I think that's going to be a big push.
I mean, we're all about having borderless investors and saying, look, you don't need to be on the ground in Perth to know that there's stuff happening. But I would implore you, if you're in Sydney and you're listening, go up and spend a weekend in Brisbane.
Oh yeah,
I've gone up there, spent a lot of time up in Brisbane. You can just feel it. You can feel the shift in the air. You talk to people, the kids at the park, and like, we used to be in Sydney, we used to be in Melbourne. I'm like, they've all moved up there for a lifestyle, and they've all kept their Sydney and Melbourne incomes, moved their family, and like they're bang for buck. They're buying a freestanding home. It literally took me at 8 o'clock in the morning to get to the airport. It took me 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, what traffic?
Yeah, there's no traffic.
Where in Sydney could you drive that many kilometres on the way to the airport without sitting in traffic? I'm like,
it's unbelievable.
You can understand why this place is livable. And we're not talking just Brisbane, we're talking Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast.
Yeah.
Like that, all three areas have insane livability, everything that you need on your doorstep. And you go, it actually feels a little bit undervalued even for what it is.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The funniest thing is when you hear people from Brisbane complain about the traffic.
It's wild. Or the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, if you think it's hot, then Jesus, what are we? Yeah.
When I got off the plane 2 weeks ago in Perth, it was 1 a.m. on Monday morning.
Yeah.
They opened the doors to the plane. We had to walk down the tarmac. It was 36 degrees at 1 a.m. in the morning.
It's incredible.
Just this assault of heat.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
nuts.
We're privileged here. So the other one I think we just touched on before is around migration. And I think this has come up quite a lot in some of the chats that I've had. So if you listen to this, jump back into the episode I did with Peter Raptis, a valuer. But yeah, I mean, some of the data that I get is with migration and migrants come in, they will buy a property within 5 to 10 years, which is scary when you think about it. When people have been here for a long time that can't get into the market, a migrant will come in here and buy within 10 years. That is an insane appetite they've got to get into the market.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we talk about all the migrants. So we don't meet current levels of demand at the moment.
No.
We're not building fast enough, but there's a whole wave of people that are going to come in here. What do we say, 850,000?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. We take a small portion of that are going to buy in the next few years.
Yeah.
We're not even building enough to keep pace with that.
No way. And the Albanese government wants to build 1.2 million properties over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
The data shows, and I did a video on this a little while ago, the data shows the last time they got close to that number and they did just under 1 million properties was during, and you'll remember this because you've been in broking for a while, it's when the significant investment visa was getting pushed by China. And we were getting so many Chinese investors coming into Australia and buying properties.
Yeah.
That money has kind of dried up now.
Absolutely.
We don't have that. But then also you put on top of that, the cost of labour now has gone up, the cost of material has gone up. How's the government exactly going to do this?
People can't do renos on their house at the moment. It's just like they're just staying put going, the renos are just far too expensive, let alone the cost of building.
Yeah.
And you can see that, difference with the price point when you look at a house that's unrenovated versus a house that's renovated. The renovated house gets such a premium, both on rent and also on the purchase price. And it's like, it's very clear we talk about products in the property market. They're unequal products.
Yeah.
A finished one, always in demand at the moment.
You're totally right. You're totally right. We see it all the time on price guides and stuff like that. Something needs a little bit of work straight away, boom, it's a drop. People just don't want it. So so you're right. Supply and demand, there's too many people coming in, there's not enough product. And not only is there not enough new product to be built, there's not enough existing product now for people just to live in.
Yeah.
And this is why homelessness rates are actually going up. There was some really interesting data that came out of PEXA a little while ago. And just even also the issue that I'm seeing is people still aren't moving out to regional areas yet. They're not desperate enough to do that. We've actually seen the numbers start to come back down. And PEXA put out a report a while ago, and what they said one of the conclusions they came up with in their report is that the reason regional areas increased was not because so much of people moving there. It was because people weren't leaving during lockdowns or going to university, and they stayed within their country towns, which was really important. I'll send you the article. It's amazing. And this is why, as a buyer's agency, we don't recommend, and I've got nothing against people that do it, we don't recommend regional areas because the volatility is just too high. And the data that came out from the Australian Bureau of Statistics during COVID said this was the first time that resi property in regional areas had gone up since 1984.
Wow.
So again, you're right. We've got too many people coming here, not enough product. The only thing that can happen is property prices can go up unless someone decides they can 3D print properties like that. And I know they're trying to, but unless someone decides that they can do that and then create these communal living spaces, there's just no real answer for it yet.
You're spot on. I've tried to look at what could disrupt the property market in the sense that what product would come in that would be a lower cost, faster way. So you look at tiny homes, for example.
Yeah.
Not a bad option, but we live in big houses here traditionally. Yeah. So that's one, but you still need somewhere to park your tiny house.
That's right.
So we don't have enough land or
where are you going to find that land exactly?
Because we're the 5th sparsest country in the world. So when you read Alan Kohler, I keep talking about, read Alan Kohler's quarterly essay, and he talks about second most expensive property market in the world, but the 5th sparsest country in the world.
That's because everyone wants to be in one space, one spot.
Look at the concentration across our capital cities and how much, and then the ability or the inability to build in those corridors. So that's one. And I forgot where I was going with that, but I feel like when we're talking about the building approvals falling, and then I guess there's issues with builders, lack of confidence in the builders as well.
Yeah, we've had a few collapse.
Right.
Been in the
it
media.
just keeps going and keeps going. Again, it's just perpetuating at the moment with the building industry going, this is not boding well for, again, this whole wait and see approach. It's going, hey, mate, let's get in now. And again, the decision makers, action takers that are getting in are just riding that wave. Yeah. So again, we talked about experts before. We mentioned a couple of names, and I watch these videos, and mate, the videos that talk about these housing busts get so many views.
They do.
I'm like, are the people that are watching this agreeing with this, or they're watching it because they disagree with it and they're trying to see what's in there? And I feel like the sentiment is more, because I could put a really positive video out there. Yeah. Gets nothing.
No,
you put
absolutely.
one of those negative views and geez, mate, that will just go off. And it's and you put a name like Harry Dent or Kiyosaki attached to it. Yeah. And are they out of tune with the Australian market, and they're applying, American or European ways of looking at the property market, not knowing that this market is so damn resilient? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really good question, because I get asked about it all the time. Someone going, oh, this guy said it's going to crash. I've got a quick Harry Dent story. So I went and saw him speak in Luna Park a few years back, right? They did it under the big top. And I was just interested to see what he was on about. And I know one of the other guys that I work with in Melbourne, one of his mates got so into Harry Dent that he sold 2 properties because he was convinced the market was going to crash, like Harry said. Yeah. And this is my issue with guys like Harry and Robert, even though I've read their books and like their stuff. Yeah, I got nothing, but they've got no fiduciary responsibility to what they say. Whereas you and I, if we make a mistake for a client, it's going to bite us back pretty quickly, right? These guys are in the business of selling books, newsletters, and courses. That's what they're in the business of. Again, nothing against it, but I'm just saying you've got to understand what the agenda is here to say some of the things that they say. This guy sold 2 of his properties that we know, and it nearly destroyed his marriage because he was trying to do the right thing, listening to these guys. And we got a saying in the office that Harry Dent's predicted 12 of the last 2 recessions that we've had, because a broken clock is right twice a day. And old mate is just on and on and on about this market crashing. Yeah. Again, one of the things I mentioned before, non-recourse loans versus what they do in the US is totally different. Correct. If you buy a property that doesn't make money, and we've seen it on 60 Minutes, young girl buys 5 properties in a mining town in the middle of Western Australia, in the middle of nowhere.
ABC love these stories.
They love them. They love them. Yeah. And, and then the properties go to nothing, and then she's left with the debt. And it's like, well, my mortgage broker should have told me not to this, or it's always someone else's responsibility, not the person that bought it, which is just annoying. But anyway, that debt's going to follow that person around. Absolutely. Whereas in the US, especially during the subprime mortgage crisis, they just went back to the bank, they threw the keys, and they went, you can have the asset and you can have the debt. Here in Australia, they go, we'll take the asset, we'll sell it, whatever the loss is or difference between your purchase price, that's following you. Yeah. And that stops Aussies from giving up. The last thing Aussies are going to sell is their home. Correct. They'll sell their investment properties if they're not working out. And typically investment properties are in areas that are more tourism-based, hospitality-based, something like that, where they're all about rental yield, not so much about growth. So they'll sell those first. And that's why you see the ripple effect. And typically the rule of thumb is those areas on the outside are the last to go up, but the first to come down. Yeah. But I think it's where I see guys like Kiyosaki. Rich Dad Poor Dad's a fantastic book. This
is where I feel you, but you feel torn. Yeah. Because mate, you've given me so much here at Rich Dad Poor Dad. Is it rules like the cash flow quadrant? I think
they've got some great stuff. The board game that they got, great stuff.
Love it. And then you're going, but mate, I don't agree with you here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there's anybody on the planet that I know that I agree with them 100% on anything, right? But I am torn because, again, I think these guys that have had great success and are very well respected. But then when they say stuff, especially I feel like you kind of mentioned before, about countries that they don't live in or necessarily know. The RBA acts differently to the Fed. The way interest rates go here are a little bit different. You can't lock an interest rate in for 30 years.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Correct.
It's very different. Leverage is a little bit different here in certain aspects. And the thing too in Australia is that every single capital city, not unlike the US to a certain extent, but every capital city is different and runs differently. The GDP that Perth produces is totally different to what Sydney produces, to what Melbourne produces. They're all different. And then you've got satellite cities. Yeah. You've got Sydney, you've got Wollongong, you've got Newcastle. They're satellite cities. You've got Brisbane, you've got the Gold Coast, you've got Sunshine Coast. Yeah. Satellite cities. So they're all very different in that respect. So I think that it's important to listen to what these guys are saying. But at the same time, I think it's important to understand the experts on the ground in Sydney and what they're saying too, or Melbourne or Brisbane. The problem is we're not even after saying that out loud, listen to the experts. I listened to the experts that said the property markets were going to crash in 2020, 2021. You know, we had the COVID, we had the construction cliff, we had the mortgage cliff. You just Google bloodbath Australia, and there's a million news articles that have been done within the past 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at this on YouTube. I'm like, there's 35,000 views on one video in like a day. Why the property market's going to crash?
Yes. Yes.
And you put another video, why it's a great time to buy a property, and you won't even get a smidge of that.
Mate, you just need to be more controversial, Aaron.
Oh, look.
You need to start saying some outlandish stuff.
I agree.
And then you'll get your views. You won't get any respect, but you'll get the views.
I was about to say, I don't think I want the views, mate, because I'm not ready for that. But it's also like, yeah, I think we're staying true to our message, which is, hey, I don't need the detractors in the market. Yep. That's just noise.
Yep.
What we want is people that need the right team around them.
Yep.
The right support, the right data to make decisions, so the right data to make decisions, and someone that's going to enable them to be a long-term growth partner.
Yeah.
And I say this, you'll only rise to the standard and caliber of your team.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
And you see that time and time again, where if you don't have a strategic buyer's agent, you know, they've just done a course and now they've come out, it's a different outcome. You don't have a strategic mortgage broker that can't think 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of you. You'll get you reap what you sow. If your planner or your accountant's not weighing into the conversation to go, here's how we can help you optimize the tax and forward planning, you're left fumbling in the dark, and no wonder people are feeling a little bit overwhelmed or unsure about what the next step is. So confidence equals clarity is what we're big on. Jay, I want to say thank you very much, mate. People get in touch, best way to follow you guys?
Thank you so much for the plug. Jump on the website. There's so many videos on the YouTube channel which, you know, talk about the market. So please just get educated. And I just, my biggest message to people is just, you know, have a great broker, have a great buyer's agent, have a good conveyancer. Like, you need a team. Like you just said, like, to us, it's the biggest thing. So jump on our website. You can contact us through there. Give us a call. We're in Barangaroo in the city, but we've got offices in every state. So always happy to have a chat and just find out how we can help people grow their wealth properly.
And I feel like this chart, we're going to include it in the notes. We're going to include it as a image as well. But when you look at what is it costing you week on week, that was the exact reason that we got Jay to come in here, because that is what's going to help and visually see what you need to do to take action, whether you're buying an investment or whether you're buying your own home. Week on week, that's where the game is won. Yeah. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, mate. Thank you very much. If you love this episode, feel free to leave us a review or better yet, drop us a DM with some questions. Again, we're loving the DMs that are coming in here. So send us some questions and we'll answer those in future episodes. Thanks very much.